Everybody. Um, make sure we get our connection all clear. And here we are. We're live. So let's see. This is actually the first time I think I've done live on using the actual uh, computer. Actually, I've actually usually do it on my phone. So it's kind of, I thought it'd be a little easier because I have a few notes that I've done. So we're going to let everybody start rolling in. And I see some people popping in. I just want to make sure that we're getting moderation on here. Yep, I see Terry and Lynn and Bibbit to Ribbit. So some of you guys who've popped in missed my morning monster today because I didn't do my morning monster today. Yes, I had to do. We were down to one car today, so we had some potential automobile problems, and so I had to drive into the city and do some errands. So that's why we didn't get Morning Monster. So before we get going, I'm gonna just let some bodies roll in here. Um, I see Cheryl, and I see everybody coming in. So we're getting a little bit of a crowd, so that's good. So just for those of you who are popping in and don't know what's going on, what are you doing? I had, over the last couple of weeks, I had a few people ask me about uh, trying to maintain a creativity while you're stressed out. If you choose the artist path, that's kind of like always. So, unless you're really lucky, But if you're a struggling artist for sure. So that's what we're gonna do, and I'm gonna wait till we get a few more buddies. Hello, Susie. It's Sue McGettigan. I just like you. I just like your last name. I always love when I get to say your last name, McGettigan. Anyway, so all right. So I suppose we'll give this another minute or so and let people roll in. And I see Kim, and I see Kathy, and I see Stephen. So everybody wants to know how to how to make art under stress. It's crazy. Okay. Okay. So first off, I suppose should we get going? I'll give it another minute or so. I see some new bodies rolling in, so we'll just give it another minute or so. Um, I I haven't done anything productive today, anything creative today, other than prepare for this. So just to let you know, I've had some of the advice I'm going to be giving you today. I have not been able to do myself today, so just to let you know. So. Let's see. We're getting some more people. I'm just saying hello as we gather the crowd, as the ushers lead you in. And I see some people I haven't seen in a long time rolling in. Hi Wilson. Hi Deborah. Debs is zooming in from way across the pond. And there's Juan. I haven't seen Juan. I haven't seen you in 1,000 years, Juan. And there's Doug. And all right. So Robin Williams is here. All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So this is going to be kind of an informal thing, and I'll be answering your questions. But mostly, I just thought that I could just kind of give you some insights and my perspective on this. And I know we're sort of faced with sort of a crazy time where there's stresses, all over the place. It's obviously coronavirus. And then we have just the stresses, and there's protests going on, and there's financial stuff, and it's stressful time. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing artistically. That can actually be something that's helpful. But I think the first thing that I wanted to chat about is we're going to talk about a few different things. But first off, I'm going to break it down into just the idea of this being art therapy. Now, I don't necessarily do this a ton. But thinking about like just releasing steam, using art as a method of releasing steam, because eventually we're going to get into how to actually make something that you really, really cherish. But that's a little bit different than so just kind of releasing steam. But that has its value. So those of you who watch me on Morning Monster, that concept was developed as a way of releasing steam. Okay, the idea of drawing a monster in the morning was something that was developed years ago, essentially by my mother, when I used to have nightmares. And so I had nightmares like, and so eventually what happened is that she basically said, you'd have a nightmare, okay, we'll draw your monsters. And that essentially gave me control of my monsters. And so that was a way of addressing it. It was a way of actually coming in and uh, dealing with stress in a different way. And I think that it's important that there's a few different ways to do it. So, for instance, like one way to do it, let's say you're just stressed and sort of like a punching bag. One way you can do it is literally just take a piece of charcoal, a crayon, whatever, and just go. Blah, blah, blah. Now, the thing with this, though, if you take this approach, first thing you've got to do is you've got to just take out any judgment, any self-judgment, because the point of this is not to create something that I'm going to hang this in a gallery. It might be, but that's not really the point of this. This part of it is just the anxiety stuff. It's like I'm going to just so be abstract expressionism, do all that sort of stuff. And I think that that is definitely a valuable way. I mean, I know that in art school I used to do a lot of splatter art. Which eventually got refined into stuff that I actually really liked. But it was kind of cathartic, because it was like, well, first off, I got to make a mess, right? And that was kind of a cool thing. I had a really lenient art teacher who basically gave me the studio, and I was just splashing all over the place. And actually, when I left, I remember overhearing the art secretary saying, that I was the messiest students they ever had, because they had to chisel the paint off the floor when they redid it. So that was great. That was great. I don't know how much good art I made in that time, but it felt good to do. So stress release. So I think art as stress release is valuable. I mean, I know some people journal. I'm not a great journaler, but I do think journaling has a definite value in terms of ways of doing it, because you can literally write out the issues, you can secret code yourself, you can draw pictures, you can remember, and it's a way of processing through that. Tisha and Tracy Moore, great journalers. I mean, many of you probably know Tisha and Tracy, or certainly know of them. But that's a way of processing it. Now, the thing is, the other thing that I would say before we change the topic is doodling. Doodling is good. I mean, even if you're just sitting by the computer like this and you just that's good, because I think that first off, it's just getting your subconscious going. Don't even be conscious about it. That's helpful. So all right, so there you go. There's a stress release. Okay, so that's one way to approach it. Now let's say that you actually want to do something that that you're proud of, that isn't just anxiety release. It's something that you actually would hang on a wall, something that maybe you want to show in a gallery, that sort of stuff. That gets a little more complex, I think, because I think you gotta try and make something look good. So I think the first thing that you need to do is you need to sort of find yourself getting inspired somehow. So that can happen in a lot of different ways. For me, it's always been travel. Fortunately for me, I've been able to travel tons, and I've been able to go here and there. And, every time I go to Mexico, I just want to come back and make art, because I see stuff and I do this and like, woo, my brain's going to explode. But if you can't travel, that's okay. There are other ways to do it, but travel is great. And I know, of course, you can't go anywhere, but someday I'll be able to travel again and I'll be inspired. So that's good. So it just, for me, that's a big thing. So this is part of the process, by the way. So don't sort of discount some of these silly things. These are important things Because locking yourself in a room isn't necessarily isn't necessarily going to kind of help you out, as much as experiencing the world to some degree. So that can also be done just by reading. I mean, looking up, researching your favorite artists, researching your favorite, music even. In high school, I would say that music was probably the biggest thing that led to me making art. And I would listen to something, lyrics and melody, and then that actually I'd have something playing in the background. And to this day, I actually even find myself creating something. If I get into a mood, right, there'll be a song playing, and if that song is just hitting the chords with me just right, I might be listening to that song, 500 times while I'm creating a piece because it's just like, okay, this is the right groove. So music can really kind of get you, inspired. I think the other thing for me personally, there's museums, of course, that's the type of thing, looking at other artists. But for me personally, because of the nature of what I do, it's junking. Because the cool thing about doing stuff with found objects is if you're not feeling inspired and you go to the junk store and you go, hey, what's this thing? Oh, to me, that's like the coolest thing ever, and all of a sudden my brain, and then I find something else and I go, what if I put these things together? So going to the secondhand store, walking into a rusty place, going down alleys if you have alleys. I know I had some friends who lived by Lake Michigan, and stuff would, drift ashore, and they take a walk. I think every morning, every week, whatever it was, and they'd gather stuff up, and like, ooh, cool, and all those things would go into their work. So having this fresh input can really, well, it can distress you because like junking is great because it's sort of like, you're out doing something. You're not locked in the studio and you're out doing something. It makes you feel better. So I think that's that's a very helpful thing. Okay, so those are some inspirations. Okay, so inspirations I do think are important to help get the stress out. So don't discount that. Very, very important. Now, the next thing is, at some point, you actually have to get off your butt and go into the studio. And that can be a very scary thing. That can be, I mean, a daunting thing. When you have a project, you basically, oh no, I've got to create something. So my recommendation, especially if you haven't been able to get into the studio for a while, if you haven't been able to get anything done, and I don't care what it is you're working on, I don't care if you're doing watercolors, or I don't care if you're doing found object stuff, whatever it is that you're doing, I think that it's important to actually just go in there. And if you don't necessarily try a big project right away, do something small. It's like in my case, I might say, I'm going to make modified pens because it's intimate. It's something that I can potentially see an end to. It's something that I can, if it's not going to work out, then I can move to something else. And I think that's a very, very helpful thing. So, what you don't want to do is you don't want to start with the the Sistine Chapel. And that was a big problem, like in art school, right? In art school, it was sort of like, here you are at 20 some, and you're like early 20s, and you're like, I am going to make the biggest thing ever. And I'm going to make the coolest thing ever. And usually it wasn't the coolest thing ever, but you thought it was going to be. So what I recommend is, to get into the studio, to get into the groove of going to the studio, make small things. So What About Bob, right? If you guys haven't seen What About Bob, well, What About Bob, the idea is baby steps. Okay, I love What About Bob. The idea was like baby steps to the studio. Okay, you actually go through the door. That's important. Go through the door. Baby steps. Baby steps to your art stool. Okay, baby steps to the canvas, and then it's just going through that process. I think that's really, really an important thing to do. And what I would say is, try and commit a certain amount of time. Try and say, okay, like in my case, I say, okay, I'm going to go into the studio 5 days a week. Okay. It's usually more than that, but I'm going to go there 5 days a week. Now, some days are just shitty days. Some days you just don't have time to do it, and some days, or you're just not feeling the groove or whatever. But if you go in there, at least say, I'm going to try and do something for 10 minutes, and then say 30 minutes, but just set these minor, these little mini goals, not minor goals, but mini goals for you. Just basically do something that's, it's like the whole thing of, even like doing a workout, right? They always say, well, set your goals small. So, do something that you can realistically achieve. And what I think you'll find is if you basically say, I'm going to go into the studio for 5 minutes, you'll be in there for 15. If you say you're going to go in for 15, you'll be there for a half an hour. So I think that's an important aspect. And the thing is, whatever you do in there, it doesn't have to be anything major, but do something in there. And I think that's, a sketch, a morning monster, a chalk drawing on your wall. It doesn't really matter. But the key to this is really trying to make a pattern. Give yourself a pattern to sort of fall into, because that was the big thing with me, was trying to find a pattern. Now, I know it's really kind of daunting, especially with all this stuff. We're going to talk about various levels of stress coming up, but I know it's very, very daunting when you're faced with, a more substantial piece. Okay. And I know that when you are, we say, okay, I want to do a series of work. I want to do something that has value. I want to do this thing, and that can be like really horrifying, right? So what you need to do is you need to create a goal. Now, for me, the goal is not amount of time necessarily. For me, typically, it's like when I did the coronavirus pieces, I made a goal that I was going to do at least 3. So far I've done 4. But you set a goal, say I'm going to do 3 of these pieces for sure. I know I'm going to do it. And then, if it goes beyond that, great. But you set a goal that I'm going to work on this for a series. So I think creating a series, as opposed to this big nebulous open-ended thing. And I do think the idea of having a concept, and that doesn't have to be anything, I chose coronavirus, which is obviously a stressful subject, but that can be anything. I mean, it's like, oh, I want to do a series of self-portraits. I want to do a series of, butterflies flying around. It doesn't matter what it is. The idea is to sort of set, something in your brain that I'm going to consistently do this. I'm just going to kind of make sure I've got, if there's any questions so far. I see Vicky mentioned going to cemeteries, taking pictures. I do think photography, by the way, is actually also a great way to inspire yourself, just going back to that topic. And let's see, Jane says her pattern work is to work creatively, is to go and play. And I think that is sort of a topic that we'll get into, we'll weave back into in a little bit. Now, the other thing that I would mention is that when you're planning your attack, when you're planning your series, planning what it is you want to tackle, it doesn't have to be a series, but when you're planning this, I do think that it's definitely important to sort of spend some time researching the topic, because one of the things that does, I've noticed this. Okay, so so a lot of that my work is based on metaphors, but usually metaphors that relate to various mythologies and legends and all this other stuff, right? Well, I found that it's been very inspiring for me to have started the podcast that I'm doing about myths and legends, because I'm actually forced, because I got to talk to people about things and I've got to come off relatively knowledgeable about a topic. And so it's really forced me to do more research about topics that I should be researching all the time. So I think it's important to research. I think researching is a way of preparing, and thus make it easier and less stressful to move into the studio. So just understanding the topic that you're dealing with. and studying it a little bit. You don't have to like read every single book on the topic, but even watching movies about a topic or watching videos about a topic, or I watched an episode of SpongeBob for my latest podcast, which I'm thinking maybe I should do a SpongeBob piece. So anyway, I just think that there's stuff that can happen when you research that can make the process less stressful and more interesting. So research. One thing I would mention is that when you go into the studio, there is the most stressful part about walking into the studio, to me, is the beginning of a piece, the very, very beginning. It's like in my case, I might have a couple tubs of clay. If you're a painter, you might have a big white canvas. That by far is the most stressful part of the process for me. Now it might be exciting, and some people might find that like, yay. For me, it's like, oh, what am I going to do? So if you've ever stared at a white canvas, those of you who are painters, and that was where I started, was in painting. If you ever stared at a white canvas, sorry, I needed a sip of coffee. It's horrifying. Well, to me, it's horrifying. I'm like, oh my God, because you have to invent the whole universe. And so one of the things that I tell students when we are, when we're in class doing assemblage pieces, things like that, and you want to make something out of this old calculator, right? Well, what I tell people is add something to it right away. I'm going to add this to it. Do that right away. Because one of the things that will do is it suddenly won't be a blank canvas anymore. So same thing if you're a painter, put a line down, put a splash on there, do something, but make it not a white canvas, because that is incredibly stressful. Once you take that step, you're a little bit further. It's that whole adage, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one small step. And that's exactly true with art too. And your stress will be released the more steps you take. So you've got to like do that initial one. And it's scary to make that initial one. I'm just reading. Let me catch up to some of the comments here before we move forward. So Cheryl, one of the hardest things for me is not having a space for a dedicated spot. That is tough. I have to say that will make your life horrifying. Because at least for me, I have this sanctum. And even though it's kind of scary to go in there sometimes, just because I know I'm supposed to do something in there, it is nonetheless, it's a place. It's a place where I know what I'm supposed to do. Now, Gary, many of you know Gary from Milwaukee, who goes to several retreats of mine. And like one of the things Gary does, he does it interesting, because Gary, he has a studio space and stuff, but actually he sets up a little TV dinner table, and he watches movies, and he's got his little Dremel and his little paint thing, and he and his wife Denise she'll watch movies while he's going, and of course I think he sort of stops the movie like, okay, I need to Dremel something, and they do that. But so he's even managed to find a way, and I think I think that's an interesting thing, because I actually think that in his case, part of the thing that might be alleviating some of the stress for him while he's working might be having something else going on, like a film, having a movie in the background. So it's like, oh, I can do this, and I don't have to focus so intently. And I think that actually probably, I haven't asked him about it, but my assumption is that probably alleviates some stress. So maybe a TV dinner tray, but a little corner, maybe it can be more you get your little mobile studio. So I think that's definitely a possibility, though. Let's see. Now, one thing I would say, and this might surprise some of you guys, but one thing, going into my studio, It's terrifying to me. Um, it, I think that it, some people, and it's not me, some people like, I'm going into the studio. Okay, that's not me. I am horrified about going to the studio. It's hard to go into the studio. It's hard. It's stressful to go into the studio um, because for a lot of different reasons. Because you're often putting yourself in a position of being critical of yourself. You're going, I'm going to go in here, and then all I'm going to do is criticize myself, which is stressful. So, and when you're working on a piece, the pieces that you're working on can actually be mean to you. Yeah, you're a dummy. You don't know how to do anything. And that's what some of my conversations are like when I'm battling a piece. So, I do have a tough time, when especially, and that's especially true, by the way, when I'm just starting. When I'm just starting a new piece, it's like, okay, I gotta buckle down. Now, one of the things that what I would recommend is that when I'm doing this, one of the ways that I've tried to alleviate the stress of that is creating sort of a relationship, I guess would be the best way to describe it, a relationship with the materials. So that could be the found objects, it could be the clay, it could be the paint, sort of depending on what it is I'm doing. And I think that instead of actually me battling myself, what I think is happening is I find myself having a dialogue with the things instead. So it's not me making the mistakes. It's not me that's like, you're not working, you idiot. It's this thing is not cooperating. And this pen isn't cooperating either. So I've created this relationship with mostly the pieces, less the art utensils, but mostly the pieces I have this relationship with. And I have that at first, they're really, really mean, and they're ornery, and they're stubborn, and they're just assholes. Okay? Those things that I'm working on are jerks. Screw them, right? And so as times moves on, I find that gets less. So one of the ways that I've found to deal with that is breaks. So a lot of times if I'm working on something, when the piece starts being a jerk to me, when it starts being, you're not a big smarty pants, are you? Right? Then I'll take a break. And I used to battle through it. I used to, I remember like back in the olden days, I'd be working on those days probably a painting, and I'd be working on a painting, and I didn't like something, and the piece was being mean to me, and it was being a jerk, and then I painted all red, and then it was mean to me again, and I painted all yellow, and then it was mean to me, and then I painted all blue. Okay. Well, the problem is that I was just it was just pushing me to a level of frustration, and in frustration, I was making a lot of wrong decisions. So, I could have had a canvas that would have like 77, you looked at it sideways, it'd be like this thick, right? So, what I found for me personally seems to work is when I feel that, okay, the needling from the artwork, I just, okay, so time out, man. You're stressed out. You're stressing me out. Okay, I'm going to go in my corner and you go in yours. And that might be 5 minutes, it might be an hour, it might be the rest of the day. But it's finding a break to actually just sort of give a little breathing room, recollect my thoughts. Because here's the thing that happens. When something is feeling wrong in your piece, you're making something, what's happening in your mind as it's becoming more and more frustrating, you think everything is wrong. And so there's the risk of you changing all the good stuff too. And so when this stuff starts building up, your decisions become a lot more like, I got to do anything, right? So I think that by stepping back, taking a break, you can isolate the problem. So when the piece is giving you a hassle, you think you're a bastard, and you overreact, and then you paint it all yellow. It didn't need to be painted all yellow. It just needed a little bit of red in the corner, but you painted it yellow, right? So it's isolating what the problem is. When you come back, a lot of times, as I said, 10 minutes sometimes is all you need, a night's sleep, whatever it is, just a little bit of time will give you a fresh look at what it is. And sometimes it's like, oh shit, I just needed to do this little thing, so definitely don't overstress yourself when you're working. Take a walk, go do whatever. So let me just take a look. Let's take a look and see what's going on. Lucy was saying, that's great, like about her doll creations, about wanting to help them with problems. See, that's exactly, mine aren't necessarily dolls. I don't personify them to that degree, but yeah. Hi, Mahali, welcome aboard. Haven't seen you in a while. And all right, I think we're up to date. Hi, Sin. Let's see, let's move on here. All right, so now, if you are let's say you're working on a piece, okay, and you're at an impasse. Nothing that you do seems to be working. I mean, absolutely nothing. I mean, you just like, and you do this, and you do the same thing, and you do that. Okay, nothing seems to be working. If that happens, start a new piece. Because one thing that I think happens is that you get locked in a pattern. Because you start doing that, you're trying to fix it the same way over and over and over and over again. And so if that doesn't work, you say, oh, okay, I do that. And you're definitely not going to be thinking in the most creative way. So what I recommend, and maybe you're going to come back to the piece, maybe you won't, but start a new piece. And what typically I find happens is that I have a way easier time with something new, and because then I can look back and say, oh, I should have done that, which is what I'm doing here. And it seems to be grooving now. And you might be able to go back to the other thing and fix it. And the thing is that one thing you should consider, every piece you do, you should value. Even the shitty, crappy, yucky pieces, you should value it. Because the thing about even the shitty pieces is that nothing else, they're going to give you something to allow you to do something better, probably. Because I think if you were to sort of, I think part of the problem is if you think you're going to create a masterpiece every time, it's not going to happen. There's just some of those things you need to get out of your system. Some of those things you just need to do and set on the shelf and say, okay, I'm not going any further with this. If something happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And move on. Just let it be. Let it live its life as that. And I think that usually when you're at that impasse, is usually a point when something cool is about to happen. Now, it might be the cool thing that happens on the next piece. But the other thing that can happen, like let's say you have a thing and you just can't get over it. Now, maybe as opposed to starting something new, I guess what I should say is start something new and then you can always come back to the thing. Because one of the things that I think you'll find is that if you come back to that piece, maybe nothing will ever change, maybe we'll get stashed, but if it's something that you really, really don't like, and you have you think you might have a solution for it, one of the things that can happen is if something is that frustrating to you, you have all the possibilities in the world to do whatever you want. I made this really crappy thing. You can do whatever you want with it now. There's no limitations to what you can do with it. And what I've actually found happens is that when I'm at that point with a piece, and maybe it's been sitting in a corner for a long time. Suddenly, I'm like, you know what? I need to king, 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 and do this, that, and the other thing. And then it's like, this is the best piece I've ever made. Because first off, I've given myself some time, but also I've loosened up the screws in my head to say, I'm free. I can try anything, and I'm not locked into something. So that's the advantage of giving yourself some time, some space from a piece, especially when when a piece is being mean to you. If a piece is being mean to you, move forward. Now, one of the examples of that, those of you who watched my video or saw some of the art that I did for the coronavirus series, there is the piece was just totally sucking. It was the piece that has the hollow head, okay, and there's a little guy standing inside of it, so it's the mannequin head, and I friggin' hated it. I just friggin' hated it, and I was like ready to throw it out the door. And then something happened in which I think, with me, a lot of times I'll have like these dreams, and the dreams don't necessarily relate to the piece, but I'll be in these dream states where all of a sudden I'll be thinking about the piece and, drift back into a dream, and then I'll be thinking about the piece. And then I'll usually wake up, and then the shower will be going on my head. And then I'll go, okay, I need to try this. So what I did, what changed the piece was, if you go to my website, you can check out the link of the coronavirus stuff, but there's all this ornate stuff going around the collar and around the head. And in my studio was this frame, it didn't have a backing. It was just sort of a broken frame, very ornate frame. And I decided I was going to break it up and create this thing. And that was exactly what needed to happen. And then everything else started to flow. But something dramatic had to happen. And so sometimes those pieces that are jerks to you are doing that because there's something around the corner that you don't know about. And that you just need to sort of get past it. You need to just sort of let it sit for a while and let things gel a little bit. And that's happened to me sometimes immediately. In that case, that was within a couple days. Sometimes it's been a year before I come back to a piece. So, sometimes just have it sit on the shelf, and then you can, and sometimes I literally will say, you know what, that's a good part of it, and then plunk that on something else. And that's okay to do too. So, all right, let me see. Let's see. Cindy set things on fire. That happens for sure. It is, yeah, it is. I would see that setting things on fire would be cathartic. All right, I think it takes me a long time to realize that I don't like a piece, and I can take it apart. Yep, you can. You absolutely can. I mean, it's kind of a scary thing, Diane. But I think that I think, Diana, that it's if you hate it, there's nothing to lose, right? That's kind of the deal with it. Okay, let's see. Now, so that's kind of the core of what I wanted to talk about. But I also wanted to talk about using stress to your benefit. And this is kind of an interesting thing. And I know that, like, for instance, there's a few people who've taken on things like, I know some of you might know Debbie Tucker, also AKA the Velvet Bandit. If you live in Santa Rosa, California, you might have seen her wheat paste graffiti all over the place that are coronavirus related. But I think that there is, stress, if you have the right mindset, if you're willing to sort of address it, tough topics, like, and that could be personal things. It could be a divorce. I mean, it could be a death. It could be, it could be a political thing. It could be a personal thing. It could be any number of things, whatever that is. Trying to use stress to a benefit is not the easiest thing in the world to do, because something can be self-absorbent. But I will say that if you decide to do that, there are ways, I think, to approach it that might make it a little bit easier. So, like, for instance, when I did the coronavirus series, I was incredibly stressed out, partially because of the virus, partially because of the finances. They were related to me. There was a lot of the world was changing. It's still a scary time. And it was just an incredible, suddenly I'm like, okay, how, what are we doing here? What is going on? And so I decided I was going to try and tackle it. And it's basically comes down to, um, trying to figure out the dragon you're going to tackle. So I guess pick your dragon. Okay. So if you decide to tackle a topic, like in that case, I was going to tackle coronavirus. Okay. Find your dragon. Okay. The next thing you need to do is you need to know your dragon. Understand what it is. Now, that to some degree is having some level of empathy towards it. You try and put yourself in its shoes, whatever it is you're tackling. I mean, a death of a loved one, a death of a, whatever. So try and, the thing that is your enemy, try and understand. Okay. Because what will happen is it doesn't mean that that's going to be your point of view with the piece. What it does, though, is it will allow you to explore topics that are a lot better thought out, a lot more well-rounded. It allows you to sort of try and deal with it in a more informed manner. And I think that's sort of important when you're dealing with trying to address stressful topics, when you're trying to address things that are personally affecting you, personally hurting you, personally, making you be like this. Okay. So, get to know your dragon. And one of the things you'll find out, by the way, is when you get to know that dragon that you're planning on slaying through your piece of art, one of the things is that dragon is going to suddenly be a lot less fierce once you start trying to understand it. It's the teeth are a little less sharp. The fire coming out of its mouth is sparklers, and so suddenly you're taking the power away from it because it's like it's like me if I were to the dragon I need to come to grips with is like spreadsheets and things like that. And so one of these days I might actually do a piece about spreadsheets and taxes and stuff like that in it. And maybe they'll be less petrifying, horrifying concepts to me. But I haven't gotten brave enough to do that topic yet. But I think that if you take on those dragons, one for me, like when I think about this topic, I always think about there's a great film by Ingmar Bergman, The Seventh Seal, and so I always think of like there's a scene in there in which the knight Max von Sydow is playing chess with death. And that's kind of what it's like when I was doing the coronavirus series. It was sort of like looking at this topic and trying to understand, when I do this, why I'm doing that, and what its perspective is when I'm doing that, and trying to get in its head. It's kind of like being a serial killer profiler in some regard, depending on what your topic is. But it's kind of like that, trying to get in the head and know how to best prepare for it. So I think I think that there's some really great art coming out right now, just between the stuff coming out from Black Lives Matter as well as the coronavirus stuff. There's some really interesting things that I think are happening because of it. And I just think that if you're willing to take that on, I think it will make things less stressful. I tend to believe that. So let me just scroll down. I see we got a lot of comments here. Let's see. Make sure we get the chess game. Yep, the chess game. Yeah, Diana, I think the artist block thing, as I said, I think what you might find, I do recommend if you can just try and do little bits. Don't try and do a masterpiece. Just do little bits, do little things, do things that will inspire, but just little things, inconsequential things. One of the things I have found by the way, is that sometimes the things that seem most insignificant can lead to bigger things. Can lead to a series that is way more interesting. I mean, and I can speak just from like even doing my assemblage stuff. Like I was at a total friggin' roadblock, painting wise. I was like, and I was like, and I just friggin' hated doing the paintings I was working on, and I just said screw it. And the first thing I did was I did something with a shovel. I took a shovel and I made a little shrine out of a shovel, and that was the very first assemblage piece that I made. And I think that sometimes it's helpful to sort of move to something new, move to something that you maybe don't even think you'd like. I remember I was resistant to the concept of doing anything sculptural. I'm a painter. After all, I'm a painter. I'm not one of those sculptors, right? So I do think there's absolute value in either working smaller, working differently, doing unexpected things, because I think that I think that you might do something suddenly, do some little minor thing that will lead to something bigger. And it could be like, you drawing little things on a pad of paper, and he's like, I'm gonna make little cartoons, little cartoons. And who knows? And that could be a whole series. And it's just because you were doodling one day on a thing, right? So I think that I think that big things can happen. As I said, big things start in small places. So oh, crap. Hi, Melissa. Wait, welcome aboard. I'm glad waiting for what you were watching me while waiting for roadside assistance. I'm honored that you decided to join us. So at that now, I think that more or less sort of concludes what I wanted to talk about. So what I thought I'd do is, anybody has any thoughts or questions or comments they wanted to share, we can spend the last bit of time just kind of doing that if you wanted to do that. Um, I understand, by the way, I'll let you guys, anything you want to type, go ahead and type if you have anything. I understand how stressful it is to actually try and create in these times. I have found, in my case, having goals, like I said, like currently I'm working on a new online class. Okay, something that I have to do. I have to do this, and I have to do it because, well, I need to make some money. But I've got to do it because this is, a lot of times I'll even make a poster, like an online class or upcoming workshop in that case, or a piece of art. I'll say, I'm going to show you guys a cool piece of art that I'm working on. And I might not have even started it, but it's an idea. And then I'm like, oh shit, I gotta actually make something. And so it's like, okay, force myself into it. That works for me. That doesn't necessarily work for everybody. I think that I do find that if I can, if I start something, I'll force myself into working towards it. I think though that most people just need to get some inspiration to actually force themselves to pick up a pencil or a pen. You mean like, so Diana, you're referring to this type of thing? If so, this type of thing is kind of a novelty. It's just something that popped up. If you're talking about online classes, I get new ones and those aren't necessarily live. Those are, videos. I do those usually 2 or 3 a year. So I'm not sure which. Sin's asking what the next topic of my next online class is. I am keeping that top secret. It's going to be cool. It's a little bit lighter. I mean, not that light. I mean, don't get worried. Those are like, oh no, don't worry. It's not that light, but it's a little bit lighter. I think you'll like it. So yeah, I'll be revealing information about that by the end of the month, I'll start revealing information. So about that. So uh, good to hear, Vicky. Glad. Yeah, I'd be curious to see what you're working on. Let me just kind of scroll back. That's an interesting thing, Kim. I know uh, the idea of playing with it in Photoshop. One of the things that my wife Andrea does is that she'll actually, with her collages and paintings, she'll actually try different things out. Sort of the word she uses is audition. She's like, oh, what happens if this is blue? What happens if this is? I don't have that kind of patience to do that. I want to just do it. I'm a touchy person, so but yeah, that's another possibility. Is even I know you're kind of a found objecty thing person, but might be a way of trying things out. I don't know. I'd like to just go for it, but um, I totally understand what you're saying, Kathy, about the depression and lack of confidence. And um, well, in terms of that, one of the things I have in the studio, I have lack of confidence as well. Okay, I think anybody does, and that's when I was talking about the mean art pieces, right? Um, and I think one of the ways that, like I was referring to, is if you can take you not being the problem and make it the trying to create a relationship with the whether it's objects or canvas or paints or whatever it is you're working with. If you understand that, I look at it this way. So I have a new project and I have this relationship with this stuff. And initially, it's a difficult relationship. Initially, it's a relationship that isn't very smooth. The stuff doesn't like me so well. And so then I'll be a little standoffish with it also. But the more I just sort of, work at it and step back, give it the piece some space and me some space, eventually you get a dialogue. And what ultimately happens, it's sort of like this. Okay, I always one of the examples that I often use in class is the idea of a pendulum. Okay, when I'm working on a piece, usually, and then I'll be like, I want this, and the stuff I'm working with is like, screw you, buddy, I'm way over here. And then I'm like, eventually what I find is as I sort of battle the piece, we end up right where we need to be together. But it takes this little give and take to get to know each other. So think of it as a relationship. It's not you. I think that's one way to sort of do it. I mean, is to just not think of it as you that's the problem. It's the stuff. It's being a jerk to you. Let it be the problem and try and work out your deals with the stuff. So let me just see what I've missed here. A lot of stuff. SpongeBob, I see. Let's see. Yeah, you never know. I might do some SpongeBob stuff. Hi, Pat. I'm glad that you've liked it, Lois. And I'm glad, I assume, Sin, you're referring to the online class with piqued your curiosity. Now, let's see. One thing I just noticed, Kim, that you were reaching out to Kathy. I do think like some of these groups, these art groups, like obviously in my case, I have the Domain Workshop Junkies. I think, and that's a really good group of a really bunch of good people who are very supportive. I think that's always helpful that you can throw stuff off. Let me just see what Marty wrote here. First 3 nights of everything happening in this is very nerve-wracking. The only thing that helped was I started painting the skyline to red-orange. Now I need to go back in and finish it. It was more of something to do to release while watching live streams of friends, but now I need to figure out how to finish it. I don't do painting, so the whole thing is weird to me. Well, and that's cool because I think that working through that Marty, is I think that if you, it might be something that evolves into something else later. Like you could have these and then somehow they get incorporated differently as time moves on. So if you don't have an idea right now, don't be afraid to sort of set it aside for the time being and then let it grow later as you process stuff. I think that's totally legit. Let's see, Robin's been giving herself design challenge prompts, limited supplies, think like an Iron Chef. Oh, that's a good idea. Also silly stuff like painting bots on dominoes. Yeah, exactly. Small things that could be like, incredible thing. Like if you think, I don't know if you're familiar with Mr. Imagination. Look up Mr. Imagination, Chicago artist, and he did these great little brush people. And I sort of ripped off some of my little brush ideas. They're very different looking than his, but and I do those just like, I got nothing to do, I'll make a brush person. And he does those, and they're very fun, a little more raw than mine, a little more expressive, but same idea, small things. But he's making a fortune off those brush people. That's a good idea, Lois, of looking at stuff that's inspirations from your past to prove that you actually do have, because that's a really good point, because when you're in the moment of stress in the studio, you sort of forget what you're capable of. I know I've done some good art. The problem is when I'm in it, doesn't necessarily feels like it. Oh, I've lost it all. Oh, I once could do stuff. I once knew how to paint. Now I know nothing. You still do. You still do. You just, it's just that your artwork's being mean to you. Don't let your artwork be mean to you. That's all. Yeah, fear of failure is a huge rejection, huge big dragon for sure. Let's see. I think kitsch is kitsch is an interesting thing, because I think one of the stresses that I come across in students in my class is that I didn't go to art school. Whoop-de-doo. Okay, that doesn't really mean anything. Art school was helpful for me. Part of that was helpful because I happened to align myself with an instructor. What I did under that instructor is vastly different, but I did learn a lot about painting, and so it was valuable. But I would say that the idea of kitsch, there's a playfulness to that. I think the idea of kitsch, and certainly found objects, is it doesn't feel like it's fine art. So therefore, there's a lot of pressure that's taken off. It's like, oh, I've got a Popeye doll. Well, that doesn't feel like fine art. And so therefore, you can actually make cooler fine art because you're less limited. You have these preconceptions that can sort of weigh you down. Let me just keep going here. Let's see. Jane said, I find that I can cope with stress better if I take time to be creative. It takes me into a space where different problem solving happens, and it's much more exciting. So when I come back to stressful issues, they are easier to deal with. I think it must be, I must use the emotional stress energy and put it into creative work. Yeah, I think that's, let's see, Kim, hold on a second. Are you ever surprised when someone really likes a piece that you don't think is very good? Okay, so there's another reason why you never want to throw anything out, and why you want to just move on. Because I've actually sold a lot of pieces that I thought I'd come back to, like, okay, here's a picture of it. Okay, and then somebody goes, it's amazing. Like, really? I was about to rip that thing apart. And of course, I don't say that. But it's like, yes, I love it too, but in essence, though, you always have to remember that sometimes it's like looking at a sunset, right? Even though you're creating the sunset, in essence, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have value for somebody else, right? So it's like, that's not, I've seen way better sunsets. Well, somebody else, that might be the best sunset they've ever seen. So I think that happens all the friggin' time. So it's funny. Andrea, I know it happens with her a lot too. Let's see, Pat, been working on painted backgrounds combined with weird collages of angels in my art journals, lots of Corona images, also collage of George Floyd being welcomed into heaven. Yeah, and that's, I think all that stuff is very cool to process, if, especially, and just even, try and understand where one fits in that, and where one, and learning about it, I think is of value, and growing. And it might be a one-off, it might be a series, but I think it's very, very helpful to address. I don't do a lot of contemporary issues. I typically, coronavirus was sort of the exception to that. I weave a lot of that stuff into metaphor. So when I'm dealing with contemporary issues, a lot of times it's underneath layers of metaphor, of mythology. So it's there, but it's not there. Coronavirus was probably the most direct one that I did. But so that's another way, by the way, that you guys can address this stuff, is it doesn't have to be blatant. You can address these things metaphorically in a language that you might be more comfortable addressing it in. Fern says, good idea to have multiple things to work with. Let's see, Cheryl likes playing with watercolor. Let's see if there's any questions here. Yeah, I know. I hear you, Pat, about forgetting. Art school did a number on a lot of different people. As I said, I kind of got through it okay, but I know that art school did a number on a lot of people. So let's see. Kristen said, in a city with little art, how would you go about finding the culture and teachers that can help someone with medical condition causing work not to be an option? Let's see, I'm not sure I understand your question. In a city with little art, how would you go about finding the culture and teachers that can help someone with medical? Oh, okay, I see. Well, what I'd say, Kristen, is these days, there's, depending on who you're looking for, like online classes are always good options. You just have to find, whatever your style is, find the instructors that are doing it. That's a lot easier now, and it's sort of being forced. And I'm not sure if I'm addressing the question exactly that you meant, but I think also, don't be afraid to sort of, I'm a firm believer that to find your voice, oftentimes you have to start off by finding the stuff that other people are doing that you like. Okay, so pick some artists that you like, follow them, try and understand what they do, and start creating. Now, initially, what you might find is that your work looks a lot like their work, and that's okay, because eventually, what's going to happen, especially as you get new influences, you're going to find yourself growing. But don't feel bad if initially you feel I remember seeing an exhibit of Diego Rivera's work. And Diego Rivera had, he went to school in Paris, and all his early stuff looked like Picasso-y stuff, very cubist looking stuff. And then eventually he found his voice. He was Braque, and here's Picasso, and he's like, hey, I like that. And then that led to his amazing murals. So don't feel bad about stealing from other things, because what's going to happen is you'll just start stealing from different sources, and eventually all that stuff that you steal from ends up becoming you, because you're just drawing from a variety of different sources. So as I said, I'm not entirely sure that I addressed your question or not, but if not, you can ask it again. Congratulations, Diane, on the sale. Yeah, I would say that's probably yeah. I would say, Kristen, in terms of that, it as I said, just work, and just take what you can. And I understand that the limitation of not being able to leave, that's got to be very, very tough. Certainly, the disabled thing is going to make things very, very difficult. But the advantage you have these days is that that the internet. I mean, if that were 30 years ago, it would be a very different. I mean, the your options would be very, very limited. So the good news is that there's a lot out there to learn from. So and let's see. Yeah, if you want to become me, you go right ahead, Kristen. You can become me. Yeah, there's tons of free stuff for sure, as Pat said. And let's see. I think that's it so far. All right, guys. I think we might call it a day. And just see if anything else pops in. All right. I think we are up to date. I'm just scrolling through to see if I missed anybody. Yeah, so good crowd. We had a good crowd today. That was great. And I just want to. Yep. Okay. Awesome. I think we're up to speed. All right, gang. Thanks for hopping in. Hopefully this, was helpful. I sort of, it's unprecedented times, right? It's just, it's a crazy, crazy time. It's unlike anything I ever expected to experience. And so, and I think, life has a way of just kind of doing that stuff to you. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. And so, you sort of muddle through. Hopefully something I said will kind of click with you, and you'll be able to move forward. Let's see, any last things I need to do? Nope, I think I got everybody. The couple things. Friday I'll be back. Those of you who were waiting for Morning Monster and missed out today, yes, I promise I'll be back. Yes, I had a last minute emergency, but I'll be back there Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, so I'll be back there. Rest of my week is going to include me doing some filming. Oh, and I should let you know, I did just put up the latest podcast, which is on Davy Jones and the Flying Dutchman and other ghost ships with warlocks, in fact. If you go to michaeldemeng.com /podcast, you can check out the latest podcast about seafaring ghosty people. So, all right, gang. Thanks for checking in. Thanks for joining. Those of you who aren't members of Demeng Workshop Junkies and you want to connect with other people, work through your stuff, show your stuff, really good group, no judgy people allowed, very, very supportive group. Just on Facebook, Demeng Workshop Junkies. Welcome to join and share what you're working on and ask questions with people and bounce ideas. So, all right, gang. Thanks for all your comments, and we will see you soon. Facebook, Instagram, somewhere soon. All right. Thanks a bunch. Ciao, 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 ciao.